I've been wanting to kind of explore the novelist's love-hate, or, oftentimes I'm sure it's hate-hate relationship with the Hollywood machine. But first, you wrote your first novel at the age of 18? That's amazing.
Yeah, I was in the Army at the time and didn't have anything better to do.
Yeah. Well, what keeps you going after all these years? What is it about the process of writing that you love so much?
Well, you just hope that the one you're working on now is better than the ones that went before.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I don't write the same thing twice, except in the case of Death Wish, for which I wrote a sequel that never got filmed until this year.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about that. But I hear writers talk about the rewards of crafting a novel as opposed to writing screenplays. But are there any creative rewards for crafting a screenplay that you don't find in novel writing or narrative writing?
It's short. I mean, a screenplay is about the length of a long short story.
Right.
But it has to be, you have to be really careful with it because you can't waste any words. I don't know. A novel or a nonfiction, any kind of book, is your own. You wrote it. It's your fault. It's also your credit. Whereas a movie is made by hundreds of people.
Right.
Or dozens if it's an independent film. But in any case, it isn't the writers. Producers and directors can claim movies as their own. Writers only if they also produce and or direct.
Uh-huh.
And I've only done that a couple of times, and it's very hard work producing, and it takes an awful lot of time.
Mm.
Getting a film made from ground zero.
You're a co-producer on Hopscotch, weren't you?
Yeah.
I love that film.
Yeah, I love it too. It was just great fun once we finally got it going, but it took I think 6 years, and I think I was on the 26th draft of the screenplay when we because we started with Warren Beatty, and it moved around a little bit.
Warren Beatty was attached to Hopscotch at the beginning?
Yeah, he was going to produce it and star in it with Jane Fonda.
Oh, wow.
And,
oh, my God, that would have been very different.
Yeah, well, it was a fascinating project, and then he found something else to do. He had a quarrel with Warner Brothers, and so that just fell apart, and we went back to starting over. And I'd been pestered for years by an independent producer named Eli Landau, who had produced a number of good movies like The Pawnbroker and so forth. And
great film.
Eli said, well, when you get tired of trying to be a hotshot producer, bring it back to me. And finally I went to him and said, how would you like to go partners on this? And he said, okay, let's do it. And he got Walter to come in and agree to do it. And once you have a star, it's much easier to commit everybody else.
Yeah, it's hard to get better than Walter Matthau too.
Yeah.
Wow, what a body.
Walter was just so much fun to work with,
Mm-hmm. I bet. When they adapt these works of yours, have you had to kind of learn to let go of your baby in a sense? Do you kind of have to distance yourself from it?
In some cases you do. In other cases, it's amazing how close they are to the book. I mean, Hopscotch was the same story as the book, but it was a comedy. The book is not a comedy. It's just a suspense thriller.
Right.
And we figured, we're going to do this again. Let's make it funny, I don't write screenplays for my own books normally because, you had a reason for doing everything you did in the book, and often those reasons don't apply with a movie, but you're too close to it to realize that.
Sure.
And oddly enough, Death Sentence is a case where I did the first couple of drafts of the screenplay, and before I even started, the producers and I sat down and we all said the same thing, which is, this book was written in the 70s as a sequel to an existing story, and we're not producing it as a sequel to anything, and it's dated, Let's do a new story.
Right.
So we started with the idea of doing a new story, which made the same point. The point really being that vigilante violence is really attractive as a fantasy, and we've all had that fantasy really frequently. And it's great on the screen. The problem is when you try to put it into actual practice, it's bound to hurt everybody connected with it.
Uh-huh.
Not just the bad guys,
Right.
And I think the movie brings that out beautifully. I mean, Kevin Bacon is just astonishing, and I think he follows that whole arc down into madness.
Yeah, I agree with that. I found that to be the case, especially the effects. I mean, obviously on his family in the film.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a concept of vigilantism that really it's ripe with drama and conflict and a certain ambiguity. What about it spoke to you when you set out to write Death Wish many years ago?
I had been the victim of a very minor crime. Somebody had slashed the top of my old convertible, which probably wouldn't have been very traumatic because I'd already bought a new top. The car was 10 years old, and I just hadn't bothered to put it on yet. The problem was I had a 2-hour drive through a snowstorm to get home that night from where it was slashed in New York. And I was mad, and I thought, well, I'll kill the son of a bitch. That was my first thought. My second thought was, well, wait a minute, he's got a knife because he had to have something that he slashed the top with.
Right.
I don't really want to meet this guy.
Right.
But by the time I got home, I was half frozen, and I'm thinking, well, I'm okay. I'm home now, but what if somebody got mad and stayed mad?
Mm-hmm.
Just didn't come out of that temporary insanity. And that was the genesis of the book, of Death Wish, the original book. The death sentence was a kind of penance for the movie of Death Wish, not for the book.
You're pretty vocal in your dislike of the film Death Wish, weren't you?
Well, Wendell Mays wrote the screenplay, and it is a brilliant screenplay. I say that at the risk of exposing myself because it follows the book very closely. But the problem was that it was originally slated to be directed by Sidney Lumet in black and white with Jack Lemmon.
Ooh.
Whoa.
That's a completely different film, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It probably wouldn't have been as popular, and it probably wouldn't have spawned those sequels, but it was really a nice script, and I was looking forward to seeing the movie, and then unfortunately the producers went broke. They had released a film that they had put all their money into that didn't do any box office. And that is the danger that many independent producers face. The smart ones are the ones who go out and raise money from other people and don't use their own. But I don't know. Anyway, they had to sell 2 properties that were ready to go, and one of them was Death Wish, the other was Serpico, and I had worked on that also.
Oh, you worked on Serpico as well?
Yeah, well, I was Frank Serpico's first ghostwriter because we lived near each other, and I was the only writer he knew.
Oh, goodness.
And I just got too... I really became scared because I didn't know how to authenticate any of the things he was telling me. I'm not a reporter. And I have learned how to do my research since then, but in those days, this was back in the 70s, early 70s, I had no idea how to go and find, confirmation for anything he was telling me. And he is a bit nutty, he's a kind of obsessive guy, and I wasn't sure whether all
very
of it
colorful,
was true.
Yeah.
And he's a marvelous character. He's a great guy. But anyway, we went to the New York Times, and they put him together with Peter Moss, who did a wonderful book, and then that was, again, turned into a wonderful script.
It's a big regret of ours here on the show because we recently did a 2-hour tribute to Al Pacino, and we came so close to getting Mr. Serpico on.
Oh, yeah.
Just couldn't schedule it. It was...
that's a shame.
Yeah, that would have been great.
He's a brilliant talker, among other things. He's got stories up to here, and the marvel. I was on the set a few times while they were filming Serpico, and every chance he got, Pacino would go and sit with Frank Serpico and just study him.
Oh yeah.
And he got him. That person in the movie isn't Al Pacino; it's Frank Serpico.
Absolutely, yeah.
He just had him cold. It was wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Well, Sidney Lumet, speaking of him, he seems like, he's obviously an actor's director, but he seems to treat the writer as king. He seems to have a respect for the writer.
I think that a lot of the directors who came out of early television are that way.
Yeah.
They had to do these live television shows, and they didn't have time to improvise new lines or anything. They figured that here's a script, this is what we're doing. And,
do you find that
2 hours
a little more rare now?
And then you had to go in front of the camera and do the show.
Mm-hmm.
And it was live.
Yeah, is that more and more rare now?
I think it is because that generation is slowly disappearing.
Mm.
Frankenheimer and Lumet, and there were dozens of really good directors who came out of that era.
true.
Well, with Death Wish, I mean, it was a hugely popular film, and it inspired these sequels. And back to the love-hate relationship, I would imagine, in spite of your kind of disliking of the product, it had to have opened additional opportunities for you.
It made a career for me. It was, I was making a living as a writer, but I wasn't doing very terribly well. I had written some movies that didn't get produced, but that doesn't count for much either.
Yeah.
And it was, I was in Africa at the time when the movie came out, and it's also the summer when Nixon resigned, and I hadn't even heard about that because I was way back in the bush someplace. And finally, I came back to, I think it was Nairobi, and there was a cable waiting for me. It was several days old from my agent saying, "How does it feel to be a star?" I didn't know what he was talking about, and all I was seeing was these newspapers with the headlines about Nixon resigning.
Right.
And when I got back to New York, I took my father-in-law to see the picture in Times Square, and it had been running for 6 or 7 weeks by then. And it was amazing. I mean, this is an afternoon, matinee performance, and the theater was packed, and there were people getting up on their seats and yelling, "Yeah, kill that guy!" I've never seen that kind of reaction to a movie, and of course, I didn't expect it. I had seen the movie in a screening before we left for Africa. And my thought, I have to confess, was, well, it's another Bronson action movie, and the others have done okay, so this will probably do okay also. The Mechanic and the Stone Killer, movies like that.
Yeah, and the Valachi Papers and...
Pardon?
The Valachi Papers, right? Didn't he do that?
I don't remember if he did that before or after, but
right.
he might have done it either. It doesn't matter. The one I remember was the Mechanic.
Yeah, that's the big one from that time.
And Mr. Majestic, which nobody remembers. But
that's a great film.
Elmore Leonard wrote that.
Yeah, that's a wonderful film.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what in your estimation did the film version of Death Sentence get right that Death Wish did not?
Well, the movie of Death Wish, I think it's an exciting movie. I mean, God knows they wouldn't have made all those sequels if it weren't.
Right.
The problem with it is that it ends on an upbeat note in which you're supposed to regard this character as the cowboy who cleaned up New York. And that wasn't my point in writing the book. My point was, and I'd written a lot of Westerns, and I'd sort of studied the subject, and, you go around shooting people, somebody's going to shoot you. That's the bottom line.
Right.
It's a circle of violence.
Yeah, he who lives by the sword, and it's true. I mean, it isn't just mythology.
Do you find, though, when was the year the Death Wish came out? It was
74.
74.
Yeah.
Do you find that a movie like that kind of thrives based on the political climate of the time?
I think so. I didn't think so at the time because it didn't occur to me, but now, we're having a spate of vigilante films again with the Brave one coming out next week, and there's another small independent film that's been running for several weeks now. And they're not exactly vigilante movies. They're revenge films. There is a difference. Vigilante is a guy who goes out to clean up the town no matter who the bad guys are.
Right.
The revenge picture has to do with getting revenge on somebody who has personally injured you. And that's what Death Sentence is, and that's what the Brave one is. So I don't know whether Vigilante is an accurate...
no, you're right. They are more revenge than Vigilante.
But they're revenge action thrillers, whether you want to call them vigilantes or not.
Yeah.
And there's a spate of them coming out right now, and, my theory, which is just my theory, but it's that we feel we've lost control again. In the 70s, there was this sense of crime in the streets, and everybody was afraid to walk around New York. I walked around New York all the time. Nobody mugged me. But it was just a sense, it was a publicity sense that the cities were unsafe.
Right.
And today, I think we don't so much feel that our cities are unsafe, but we feel the world is unsafe.
Very true.
We can't do anything about it because we have this bunch of idiots in Washington. And I'm talking about all parties,
Yeah.
You could not be more right.
Yeah. I mean...
Yeah, there's such a discontent in the world now, and it's interesting to see how our arts reflect that.
It is.
Yeah, it's very interesting. But to the state of the novel, in this day and age, we have nonstop television and video games and other media. What are your thoughts on the current state of the novel?
Oh, it's surprisingly healthy. More books are being sold and presumably read than ever before in history, which is surprising considering the amount of competition they have now from other media.
Yeah.
And I don't have any trouble selling books. And I like doing books. I like writing books because they're yours.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, if you got it wrong, it's your own fault. But if you got it right, then you're not going to have to wait until Charles Bronson gets fan mail and forwards it.
Speaking of Death Sentence, did you have any interaction with James Wan during the process?
I didn't, but in fact, the first contact I've had with him was after I saw the film.
Oh.
And I just wrote him a little note and said, this is a marvelous piece of work. I really think it's an outstanding directorial job, and the fact that he's only made 2 movies before is astonishing to me because it's such a mature work. Yeah,
and definitely, and Kevin Bacon, who is so good at playing those everyman roles.
Yeah, he did a really good job, I felt.
Yeah,
I thought he was great, and John Goodman just knocked me out of the park. He's so malevolent.
Mm-hmm.
He's so
that scene where they confront each other is classic.
Yeah.
So tell me what's next.
I thought all of them were good. The whole cast was,
Yeah. Oh, the Goodman and the gang leader, he was just frightening.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, what's the other movie he's in that's out right now? He's a likable guy with a lot of hair.
Yeah, I know, but he's not in this one.
No, it shaves his head.
He's the evil. He's the root of all evil in that one.
He's a fine actor because anybody who can bring that off and make you believe it is doing his job.
I understand that there are currently plans to adapt your historical novel, The Manifest Destiny.
Yeah, that's been kicking around it's published in 90, I think, or maybe 89. So it's been around a long time, but the same producers who did Death Sentence have it, and I hope they do it because they did Ray, the Ray Charles film.
Oh, okay.
They're good filmmakers, and I'm looking forward to it being done. There's an excellent screenplay by Kirk Ellis, and I just hope to see it done. I'm sort of following their efforts to do it either as a 4-hour miniseries for cable or as a movie.
When I read it, that's what when I read that story that it was in development, that's the first thing that crossed my mind. And HBO, is that something that you guys are looking at in the miniseries form?
They're talking to folks at HBO, and I don't know what stage those things are in because I'm not really involved in the production, but I just love to see a movie of it because it's about Theodore Roosevelt when he was a young man in the Wild West.
Yeah,
it's true. I mean, I didn't make up stuff.
That'd be great to see.
Novel,
Yeah, and tell me about your new book that came out just this past January.
It's almost impossible to explain. It's a nonfiction book. It's a biography. It's a corrective biography of a man who's been the subject of several previous biographies, all of whom got it wrong. His name was Richard Meinertzagen, and that's very hard to pronounce.
Yeah, you noticed I didn't try to pronounce it. I was waiting for you to do it.
I'm sorry, what?
You noticed I didn't try to pronounce it. I was waiting for you to...
Yeah, well, I wish he'd had a simpler name, but he was an Englishman, in spite of the name. And he claimed a lot of things. He claimed he won the First World War and knocked out lots of communist cells around Europe in the 1930s and then won the Second World War. The problem is a lot of people actually believed him. Churchill was taken in and Lawrence of Arabia and it was just amazing how far he managed to push these hoaxes. And he also, at the same time, was the dean of British ornithology. He was their greatest natural scientist between the 2 wars. And it turns out that most of the birds that he allegedly collected they were collected, okay, but they were stolen. Most of them were stolen from museums, to which he then gave them back with great aplomb.
He sounds like the Ahmed Chalabi of the early 20th century.
Yeah, but what was amazing was not that the guy lied about his life. Everybody does a little bit. He did carry it to extremes, but still, it was the fact that everybody believed him.
Mm-hmm. What is it that they say? The bigger the lie, the more people believe it?
I guess that's true.
Yeah. And what is the name of that book again? I'm sorry.
Called The Meinertzagen Mystery. I won't spell it for you. It would take too long.
Well, we'll definitely be on the lookout for that. And Mr. Garfield, thank you so much for being on our show tonight.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's been a terrific pleasure.
Yeah.